Hello, viewers of our Stop the Destruction of the World program. As usual, we are here to deal with the issue of our psychosocial, pathological state of mind and its influence on the destruction of the planet Earth, of humanity, ecology, nature, and mainly the human being. Norberto Keppe realized that the pathology that resides within our interior and stems from our interior is the main cause for all the disturbances, all the illnesses that exist in society and that also exist in nature. This is incredible, to think that our psyche can have such a devastating effect, and that only this is responsible for these devastating effects. Therefore, the study into the illness within our interior is absolutely urgent for humanity to understand things better. So one of Keppe's main discoveries is related to Theomania. When Keppe speaks of Theomania, and the word speaks for itself, Theo means God, mania of being God. So every person who thinks that she is powerful, who creates the world as she wants it to be, who idolizes the world as she wants it to be. So she doesn't adapt herself to the life and nature as they are. She creates a life for herself in accordance with her own imagination. And this generates a great number of disturbances at an individual and a social level. Can you imagine, for example, the human being on a social scale? You can, for example, make a number of associations with the ideas of some of the great dictators, governors, millionaires who use the power that they have to implement their neurotic ideas, sacrificing the population, humanity, and even nature. Take, for example, a crazy theomaniac scientist who wants to create a formula to genetically recreate the brain, thinking that nature made a mistake, that the divine creation made a mistake, or even evolution that took millions of years, as many scientists imagine, and that everything is wrong and that they have to correct this. Genetic engineering on many occasions causes a lot more damage than benefits. Only because the human being doesn't want to adapt to nature, see what he can do to deal with nature as it is, because nature is right and we are the ones who are wrong. And this type of genetic engineering, or habits such as insecticides, serious antibiotics, this intoxication that the human being is bringing upon himself, on animals, is creating all sorts of epidemics, viruses, and abnormal diseases. And one of the consequences of this theomania that Keppe discovered is precisely the fact that any human being who has a little power can cause a lot of devastation. Dr. Keppe?
I would like to show you how the origin of our work began. When we started to study psychoanalysis, of course, in the beginning, it was based on Freud, Melanie Klein, and Bion. And later, we extended our knowledge because, in my opinion, psychoanalytical explanations, to put it simply, clarify almost nothing. For example, Freud placed all the problematic issues in the sexual affectionate aspect, which greatly limits the understanding of the human being and the reasons why he becomes ill. So I entered the field of philosophy and aesthetics, because aesthetics is linked to science, which is the result of philosophy with theology. So I entered this field to find a better explanation, a better understanding of the human being, in order to reach a solution related to his neurosis. I'm going to put up a diagram to explain this better for you. Would you like to read, Claudia?
The origin of civilization, revelation. Revelation is the fundamental principle. So here we have philosophy, which is revelation. Aesthetics experimentation, and also a revelation, and theology, which would be a third form of revelation.
So what I mean by this is the following. As you know, when you go to a church, the great majority think that God would be in that temple and not with the laymen outside the church. However, you will notice that the most important issue here is an energetic one. If the individual is achieving something good, that is, doing good no matter where he is, no matter what religion he has, or those who have no fixed religion, or even those who say they are atheists, if they are accomplishing something good, they are closer to God than anyone who goes to the temple, goes to church, but is very hypocritical, only to gain advantages for himself. So what am I showing? That theology is mainly with those individuals who practice good, who have a life of work within goodness. It is mainly with those individuals who have a good philosophy of goodness, or who work with experimentation, or aesthetics like artists. You will notice that a person is doing theology and philosophy in any field. The Germans call it Weltanschauung, which means a vision of the world. Philosophy as a vision of the world that all people have. And if this vision is right, the person is close to God. Like the artists, by doing aesthetic work, they are very close to God. This is the reason why advertising uses beautiful images of beautiful women, landscapes, to attract people to buy. Likewise in churches, which are elaborately decorated with great beauty, so as to move the human being. So it's precisely the people who are linked to aesthetics that are very close to theology, because aesthetics is very close to the Creator, who is pure beauty. So when one talks of heaven, one talks about something that is very beautiful. That is, no one wants to die and go to heaven only to find a horrible place to live. I would now like to talk about a controversial issue, something which is against sanity. Because when we talk about the United States, it's because we developed there our discoveries about the social pathological aspect of civilization. And we really notice that American society gives a lot of priority to well-being linked to money. You know this, Americans themselves always speak of this. That is, capitalism, and before that communism, Marxism, placed all value in money. And society was invaded by the social economic power. So money is what rules in society right now. Therefore, the individual is worth the money that he produces and is respected for the money that he has. And so, society nowadays gives more value, for example, to economic power than political power. Political power has been almost entirely squashed by the economic power. You notice this, don't you? So an artist nowadays is obliged to paint or compose or do any type of art based on what he is going to earn, because he can't survive without making a lot of money. The issue of taxes is a terrible thing for society, because in Brazil, and to a certain degree Europe and the First World, less in the United States, the individual has to work half his life to give money to those in power. You see? So there's a huge amount of money that a person earns that he is never going to see and is never going to benefit from. Now, consider well, this is one of the social pathologies that we've discovered, and one can say that it's based on, let's say, the Western world and capitalism, mainly Adam Smith. He was English, and when England began its great development, the Industrial Revolution, Smith encouraged the stock market, the banks, encouraged people who knew how to make money to create a capitalism that ended up stifling the industrial development itself. And right now, the world is at a crossroads due to certain people. Like here, take a look. John Maynard Keynes. He was also English, and he advocated making money not to be spent. You see, he placed wealth in the hoarding of money, saving it in treasury. And this is why the great majority of countries put the money they have saved into banks. People have this mania of sending money to Switzerland, for example, as if by having a large reserve of money put away, this makes them rich. But instead, an individual is only rich if he works with his material goods that he has, puts it to use. If the individual isn't able to work with the economic wealth that he has, he is a poor individual. Why? Because after all, wealth, riches, are in what he does. That is, a human being's worth isn't based so much on what he owns. It's not based on whether or not he has 2 or 3 houses, 2 or 3 cars, as though only this demonstrates his value, his development. But an individual who is really worth something, who has accomplished something, is the one who is able to accomplish goodness. And what is goodness? As I showed earlier in the program, goodness is based on what the person thinks, the discoveries in science, and of course, in theology per se. These 3 elements are of divine revelation, and therefore, if the human being uses them in practice, in his energetic life, in his work, he is close to the divine being.
So your understanding of the divine being, Dr. Keppe, of theology, is that of a divine being totally involved in the world, in nature, in society, in humanity.
Exactly.
So we'll be back shortly.
The most original contemporaneous writer in the world today, says the National Scientific Research Center in France. A genuine contributor to the intellectual treasury of civilization, says former U.S. Ambassador Joseph Kogassian. For these times of uncertainty and conflict comes a work of extraordinary vision, hope, and moral clarity. Brazilian psychoanalyst and social scientist Norberto Keppe writes with wisdom and authority about the things that really matter. How to heal illness, how inverted science is leading the destruction of nature, and what to do about it. Finding spirituality within, structuring a truly just society. There are more than 3,000 books published worldwide every day. None are more important than these. The books of Norberto Keppe, Trilogical Science, leading us to a new world.
So here we are on these programs talking about all these problems that the human being has. Talking about theomania, envy, inversion, aggression, hate, idleness, and how all of this can bring about the destruction of the world. But the scientific way to deal with these problems in humanity is contrary to the way society normally works with this issue. That is, the penal, educational institutions, for example, even the religious have a tendency to punish people for the mistakes that they have committed. So, a delinquent, a thief, a liar, a layabout is severely punished due to the problems that he has. A person knows, for example, that if he commits any type of crime, he will enter a penal institution, and that the chances of learning a lot more about crime are enormous. So he comes out a lot worse than when he went in. Why? Because to be able to achieve a certain amount of balance in our conduct, we have to be conscious of our problems. So take a look at this diagram that I'm going to show you. Censorship, consciousness can, in society, manifest itself a lot. For example, through the manipulation of data that does or doesn't come out in the media, and even the lies that are linked to the media. The media should be an instrument of conscientization of humanity, not only of its problems, but mainly how human beings can develop within what is good, beautiful, and truthful. But what the media is doing is the censorship of the real facts related to information. A second manifestation, for example, of this censorship against consciousness is racism. For example, one nation tends to censor another nation about problems that they themselves have but don't want to address. This censorship can also manifest itself in sectors. The human being's attitude in society is very sectarian, like these religious groups, institutions, the academics, all these know-it-alls who refuse to address anything that isn't related to their own ideas. Another form of pathological censorship, of seeing oneself in society, are illnesses, because the inconscientization of the human being's problematic generates all sorts of illnesses, both organic and psychic, but mainly social illnesses. As any kind of problem that is inconscientized is hidden, and due to this gains more strength.
I would like to do a rundown of the work that we have been doing. As of 1977, I began developing an overall work based on three sectors: the theological, the philosophical, and the scientific artistic, to be able to study the human being better and enable him to see what his problematic is. And so I ask myself, what is the difference between my work and, for example, the work of an institution that is focused on doing good? And I always say that the difference is that our work, being an ample work, seeks to provide consciousness to people. Do you see? Make people conscious, or making the person conscious of who he is. So the great difference, as Claudia spoke of, sectarianism, society generally divides everything into sectors. If, for example, you belong to a certain society, you have rules that you cannot break. If you belong to a religious society, so you have Catholics in conflict with Protestants, or even within the same religious beliefs, people enter into conflict with each other. And why is this? Because the general purpose of a society is to get people to defend its own society's interests. Do you see? And our work does the contrary. We understand that we have to provide society with consciousness of the problems that it has. For example, this issue in the Middle Ages, during the Inquisition, that if a person belonged to another religion, he was burnt at the stake, or if a person's beliefs were different than theirs. Like Aristotle, who said that the sun couldn't have spots, And Galileo came along and said, "The sun has spots. Look, can't you see them?" So they wanted to burn Galileo. It's so interesting, this. Or Galileo said, "What Copernicus said isn't right. It's not the sun that orbits around the earth. It's the earth that orbits around the sun. It's a heliocentric position. The earth is at the center." So by saying this, they wanted to attack Galileo again. Do you see? So this happens in general. The doctor has to be fixed within that certain orientation. And in medicine, in surgery, Vasconcelos had a better way of suturing a person, which was better than Dr. Montenegro's way or that of another doctor. Even within the same type of work or a same surgical orientation, each one has his own orientation and won't accept the others. And in our work, it's the contrary. Our work really shows how the individual acts, so that he can reach a conclusion whether this or that is right or wrong, if it produces what is good or produces what is evil. You see. So the work of consciousness that we do is for the individual to see, to become conscious so that he himself can resolve things, and not to condemn him. In fact, Freud spoke a lot about this, that people censor themselves all the time and condemn themselves. So the analyst has to take this censorship away from the person, because people condemn any little thing that happens. The human being is living in a delirium, and in it he sees things that don't exist. Like a child, the child says, "Oh, I spoke to my uncle today," even though the uncle isn't even in the city. But the child says that, "No, I really saw him, I spoke to him." That is, the child tells lies. The parents know this, and they say, "No, he wasn't here." So our work is to show, like the child example, that what he thinks he sees doesn't really exist. It takes a very high level of tolerance to do this, because the human being is very intolerant. He wants one thing in life, and if another person doesn't dance to the same music, he doesn't accept this and attacks the other person.
In fact, Dr. Keppe, an example of Theomania is a person who thinks that he is perfect, like a god, and attacks, and is above others, above any type of human or human weakness.
Take a look at the second item regarding the discoveries in trilogy.
Based on the process of envy, Freud, Melanie Klein, and Bion.
Melanie Klein accepted Freud's orientation very well, and she showed, why is there evil in the world? Consider well, evil is an illness. Why was Lucifer against God? Due to envy. Why did the human being go against what is good? It's due to envy. So the human being wants to be envious and wants to be well. You see, he wants to attack because envy leads him to this inversion. In envy, the individual is invidere in Latin. Videre means to see, so invidere means not to see. So envy makes the person blind to the greatness of the Creator. Then the individual becomes sick. Not because he is within evil and is unaware of it, as Freud thought, that goodness and evil were in the unconscious. No, it isn't. The unconscious is an attitude of not wanting to be within goodness. So, due to envy, the individual inverts himself and rejects goodness. Why? Because goodness is something that he has to admit is linked to God. It's in others, it's in the world. So he is envious and wants to attack goodness. In third place, what did I discover?
The substitution of the Freudian unconscious for inconscientization.
So the human being isn't ill because he has an unconscious. He becomes ill because, for example, he sees an individual who is good and wants to believe that he is evil. You see, so he creates a mechanism to hide the individual's goodness due to envy, and then thinks the contrary. So he inconscientizes the goodness that he sees in others and falls sick. So illness is a process of not wanting to see the goodness that is all around us. In fourth place,
the contrary process to that of medicine. 90% of all illnesses is of psychological origin.
This is the biggest problem. Medicine places the cause in the organic, in the material, and not in the psychological, which causes illness in the material. And there has to be a change in the medical schools to be able to reach a more exact conclusion. Let's see in fifth place.
Science is the daughter of philosophy and the granddaughter of theology.
In sixth place.
Without consciousness of psychopathology, it is impossible to reach the truth. Analytical trilogy is a universal science that covers everything.
So you will notice that the human being is a universal being and can't be studied in just one sector. So what is psychotherapy in reality? Take a look at the diagram.
Psychotherapy is the process of avoiding the human being's evilness.
So if the human being perceives that in great part he is evil, that he does evil, and that this jeopardizes himself, he will begin to control himself, do you see? The issue isn't about avoiding evil so as not to go to hell. That's not it exactly. The issue here is about living here on earth in great comfort and well-being.
So, next week we will continue with our Stop the Destruction of the World program. Our bibliography can be accessed at our site, www.stop.org.br, and also by telephone in São Paulo. The area code is 1130323616. See you next week.